Once upon a time there was a genius movie director.
This is Orson Welles speaking.
Who was married to one of the most beautiful women in Hollywood.
Me?
Now the movie director had some problems. His first film had been a work of genius. His second film was chopped apart by the studio. And he made a few other movies, but he was really more interested in going back to New York and making stage productions, which he did, along with a guy called Mike Todd, who also a decade later was married to one of the most beautiful actresses in Hollywood. He decided to do a stage version of Around the World in 80 Days, the Jules Verne novel, and he was about 55 grand short on the budget for that. So he called the studio head who had the beautiful actress on contract and said that for $55,000 he would make him a movie based on any novel he liked. The studio head, Harry Cohn, agreed, and that's how The Lady from Shanghai was born. Now the movie wasn't known as film noir at the time because film noir didn't exist. Film noir came about in 1955 when a couple of French movie academics, Raymond Bourdet and Etienne Chauveton, wrote a book about it. At the time it was just seen as a thriller. It was for Columbia Pictures, which was kind of like a second tier studio at the time. And it wasn't going to be quite an A picture, even though Rita Hayworth was seen as one of the greatest actresses in Hollywood. Now Orson Welles and Rita Hayworth's marriage was a bit on the rocks. He was on the East Coast doing Around the World in 80 Days. She was in Hollywood doing movies. And Orson Welles was probably not really meant for domesticity. He was kind of nomadic filmmaker, stage director, stage producer, and also he did a lot of radio. So they were a bit estranged, so they decided to make this movie together. Orson Welles changed her appearance. He got her hair cut shorter and dyed blonde, which pissed off Harry Cohn no end. And they went to do some of the location shooting in Acapulco in Mexico aboard a yacht called the Zaka, which was owned by Errol Flynn. So they finished filming and put it all together, and they found there were a few problems with it. They did a preview of it and it didn't work. And there were a couple of problems, one of which is that Orson Welles on location did some fantastic and beautiful location shooting but didn't do any close-ups. So they got together and decided to fix it up, and we ended up with a really interesting, really powerful and visually stunning piece of work known as The Lady from Shanghai. The story of the movie is kind of simple. In it, Orson Welles plays a guy called Michael O'Hara, an Irish merchant seaman who is wandering through New York one night and meets a beautiful woman called Elsa Bannister, played by Rita Hayworth. He saves her from being robbed by a bunch of guys, and she decides that she wants to hire him to crew on her husband's yacht, which is traveling around from New York through the Panama Canal to San Francisco. Her husband, Arthur Bannister, is the best trial lawyer in the world, played wonderfully by Everett Sloane, who is malevolently terrific in this movie. Everett Sloane had worked with Orson Welles in his Mercury Theatre as far back as the 1930s and had a long career before and after this movie as a character actor. He's really good in the film. There are a couple of other characters around. There's a friend of O'Hara's called Goldie, played by Gus Schilling, who's quite fun. And there's also another man called Grisby, played by Glenn Anders, who is Bannister's business partner. As they travel around the coast, the relationship blossoms between Elsa and Michael O'Hara, while her husband and Grisby watch on. And there's another man played by Ted DeCorsia, who turns out to be a private detective who is pretending to be a steward on board the boat. When they get to San Francisco, things get darker still, where O'Hara is hired by Grisby to help him fake his own death so that he can get some insurance money. But things aren't as they seem. The film then descends into a trial where O'Hara is put on trial for the murder of Grisby, and he escapes and has to find out what's actually going on while being pursued by the police, by Elsa, and by Arthur Bannister. Orson Welles was one of the great visual stylists of cinema. He had a gift for making movies look fantastic. He wasn't always interested in the intricacies of plot, but the location shoots he does in Acapulco, the shots on the yacht, and the interactions between the character, and the wonderful lyrical dialogue he gives all of them, including a really nice voiceover by O'Hara, which, though voiceovers are sometimes seen as a bit of a shortcut and a bit of a lazy way of doing a narrative in a movie, in this movie they work. O'Hara, we learn a lot about. He's more intelligent than he seems. He's got a reputation for being a violent man. He killed a man during the Spanish Civil War, and he still has feelings about that, and he has aspirations to be a writer. Elsa, on the other hand, has a complex backstory. She was born a white Russian in Shanghai after the Russian Revolution, and there's a few kind of intimations that she had to do some very, very difficult things to survive until she met Arthur Bannister, who then, in a way we never find out about, blackmailed her into marrying him. That gives us an extra layer of each of those two characters. And O'Hara, even though he has had a fairly rough life and has travelled around the world as a merchant seaman, is kind of an innocent in the world of the Bannisters. And that shows up in the way they play him at various times, and the revelations he has, and the kind of insights he has into the toxicity of their relationship. There's a lot to be said. There are a lot of parallels you can make with this movie with certain current wealthy men and women. And that's kind of cool and kind of interesting to just hear O'Hara's insights into how wealthy people act. And Orson Welles wasn't particularly from a privileged background himself, but he did know a lot of very wealthy people, and so I think that fed into the insights he has into the Bannisters in this movie. It really is a wonderful piece of film noir. O'Hara escapes from the jury trial for the murder of Grimsby, and he's taken some medication which are probably painkillers, and taken enough of them that it's almost knocking him out. And we get some wonderful scenes where he staggers into a Peking opera in San Francisco, and the kind of dissonant style of the music in a Peking opera really plays into O'Hara's confusion. And then he ends up in a funhouse where he's being stored until he can be dealt with. And that leads us to the iconic Hall of Mirrors scene, which is the climax of the movie. It's a scene and a style of scene which has been used in a number of other films since then, most notably Enter the Dragon, Robert Klaus's movie starring Bruce Lee. And I think that even though the Bruce Lee battle in Enter the Dragon is pretty good, I think this one's the original and the best when it comes to Hall of Mirrors endings in movies. It works really well. It was the first time, as far as I know, that it had been done, and it was a very difficult shoot because it was hard to light the mirrors correctly for filming, and they did have a lot of hassle doing that. But I think the end results show they did use a little bit of optical work to enhance what was happening in the scene, but it is an iconic piece of film, and an iconic piece of film noir. If you haven't seen The Lady from Shanghai, you should really check it out and just go for the ride and enjoy Orson Welles being Orson Welles in the film. And the lovely thing that we found out only in the last year or two is that he had that skill right up until the end of his filmmaking career, when Netflix put together the definitive cut of Orson Welles' last film, The Other Side of the Wind, which you should check out because it shows that from 1939 when he did Citizen Kane right up until 1975 when he made The Other Side of the Wind, there was nobody making movies like Orson Welles. He was a one-off, he was an original, and he never made a movie that was less than fascinating. So that's about it this time around. Thank you very much for watching. As usual, click the buttons and leave a comment and throw me a like. And if you like, you can also support the channel at patreon.com/paleocinema, where next year I'm going to be starting to do some extra content that will only appear for the people who are Patreon supporters. So as usual, watch some good films, watch some bad films. It's Noirvember, so watch some film noir movies that you haven't seen, and there are always more. It doesn't matter how many film noirs you've seen, There are always neo-noirs. There are other movies out there which are in that genre which just haven't pinged your radar yet. So anyway, take care of yourselves, wear a mask, follow the science, and I'll catch you next time.